Hey everyone, I'm Peter Stories, here to guide you today. If you use this video to drift off to sleep, please tap like, hit subscribe, and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from and what time it is there. Now, settle in, get cozy, and let yourself relax. My name is Adam and I've been a park ranger at Glacier National Park for 10 years. This happened during fall 2007, when what seemed like a routine missing person case involving Michelle became something that still haunts me. The call came in at 4:47 p.m. on October 15th, just as the sun was beginning its early descent behind the mountain peaks. I was finishing my afternoon patrol near Lake McDonald when dispatch crackled through my radio. Ranger 7, we have a missing person report. 23-year-old female last seen on the Avalanche Lake Trail around noon today. I keyed my radio. Copy that, dispatch. Name and description? Michelle Hartley, 5'6", brown hair, wearing a red jacket and gray hiking boots. She was with a group from the university, but they lost track of her after the lunch stop. I knew the Avalanche Lake Trail well, a moderately difficult 4.5-mile round trip that wound through dense forest before opening up to the lake, popular with college groups and day hikers. Usually safe, but with the days getting shorter and temperatures dropping, the mountains could turn deadly fast. I'm en route, I radioed back, already turning my truck toward the trailhead. The Avalanche Lake parking area was nearly empty when I arrived 20 minutes later. Only 2 vehicles remained, a blue Honda Civic and a white university van. A small group of college students huddled near the van, their faces etched with worry. A young man with thick glasses stepped forward as I approached. "Are you the ranger? I'm Professor Williams. Michelle is one of my students." "Tell me exactly what happened," I said, pulling out my notebook. "We hiked up to the lake this morning. Everything was normal. Michelle was taking photos, seemed to be enjoying herself. We stopped for lunch around noon at the lake. When we were packing up to leave, someone noticed she wasn't with the group. A girl with blonde hair wrapped in a fleece blanket spoke up. She said she wanted to get a better shot of the waterfall. She walked toward the far end of the lake, but that was the last we saw of her." "How long did you wait before hiking back down?" "About an hour," Professor Williams said. "We called her name, searched the immediate area. Some of the students were getting cold, and we thought maybe she'd already headed back to the parking lot." I studied the group, 8 students total plus the professor. They looked genuinely concerned, but I'd learned to watch for inconsistencies in stories. "Did anyone see her talking to strangers on the trail? Any other hikers who seemed to be paying attention to her?" The students exchanged glances. A quiet boy in the back raised his hand slightly. "There was this guy, older, maybe 40s. He was at the lake when we got there. He kept looking over at our group." "Can you describe him?" "Tall, thin, wearing all dark clothes. He had a big backpack like he was doing serious hiking, but he was just sitting there not really doing anything." "Did he leave before or after Michelle went missing?" "I don't know. I didn't see him leave, but he wasn't there when we were looking for her." I took detailed descriptions from each student and got their contact information. By the time I finished, the sun was setting, painting the mountain peaks in shades of orange and red. Starting a search in the dark would be dangerous, but waiting until morning could be fatal if Michelle was injured. I radioed dispatch. "I'm going to need the search and rescue team, and contact the county sheriff. We'll do a preliminary search tonight with flashlights, full search at first light." "Copy that, Ranger 7. SAR team is en route." I gathered my gear from the truck, high-powered flashlight, first aid kit, emergency radio, and my sidearm. In 10 years of park service, I'd responded to dozens of missing person cases. Most ended with cold, embarrassed hikers who'd taken a wrong turn. Some ended with injuries. A few ended with body recoveries. But something about this case felt different. The mysterious hiker bothered me more than I'd let on to the students. Glacier National Park was vast, over 1 million acres of wilderness. Perfect place for someone to disappear. Perfect place for someone to make them disappear. The SAR team arrived as full darkness settled over the mountains. 5 volunteers, all experienced in mountain rescue. I briefed them on the situation, and we divided into 2 groups. I partnered with Sarah Mitchell, a local EMT who'd been doing search and rescue for 15 years. "What do you think?" Sarah asked as we started up the trail, our flashlight beams cutting through the darkness. Could be a simple case of someone getting lost or injured, but the description of that hiker has me concerned. The trail felt different at night. During the day, it was a pleasant walk through towering cedars and crystal-clear streams. In the dark, every shadow could hide a threat. Our footsteps echoed off the canyon walls, and the beam of our flashlights created a small bubble of visibility in an ocean of blackness. We reached the lake just after 9 p.m. The water was perfectly still, reflecting our lights like a black mirror. The waterfall at the far end was barely visible, a white ribbon cascading down the cliff face. "Michelle!" I called out. "Michelle, if you can hear me, call back!" Only our echo answered. Sarah and I split up to search the shoreline. I moved toward the waterfall area where Michelle had supposedly gone for photos. The rocks were slippery with moisture, and I had to be careful not to slip into the icy water. That's when I found the first piece of evidence. A small digital camera lay wedged between two rocks about 10 feet from the water's edge. The LCD screen was cracked, but the camera appeared to be Michelle's based on the red camera strap that matched her jacket. "Sarah, over here." She joined me as I carefully bagged the camera. Dropped it and couldn't find it in the dark? Maybe, but look at this. I shined my light on the ground around where I'd found the camera. No obvious signs of a struggle, but these rocks are disturbed, like someone was moving around here quickly. We continued searching for another hour but found nothing else. The other SAR team reported no signs of Michelle on the main trail. We made the decision to return at first light with a full search team. I barely slept that night. Something about the case nagged at me. The mysterious hiker, the camera found away from the obvious photo spots, and a feeling I couldn't shake that Michelle hadn't simply gotten lost. Dawn came gray and cold. The search team assembled at 6 a.m., 12 SAR volunteers, 2 sheriff's deputies, and a tracking dog named Rex. I'd also called in Jake Morrison, a retired ranger who knew the backcountry better than anyone. "We'll search in grids," I explained to the team. "Primary focus on the lake area and all trails leading away from it. Secondary search will cover the drainage systems. If she fell, she might have been carried downstream." Rex immediately picked up a scent trail from the parking lot. The German Shepherd led us confidently up the main trail, confirming that Michelle had indeed hiked to the lake. But at the waterfall area, Rex became agitated, circling the same spot repeatedly before sitting down, the signal for a lost trail. "What's he telling us?" I asked the handler. "The scent trail ends here. Could mean she got in a vehicle, crossed water, or..." He didn't finish the sentence. Jake Morrison studied the ground with the intensity of someone who'd spent 40 years reading signs in the wilderness. "Adam, come look at this." He was crouched near a cluster of bushes about 50 yards from where I'd found the camera. "These branches are broken recently, and look at this." He pointed to a small depression in the soft earth. "Boot print, size 11 or 12. Way too big for your missing girl." I knelt beside him. The print was clear. A hiking boot with an aggressive tread pattern. Could be from any hiker. Maybe. But look at the depth. This person was carrying extra weight. And see how the toe is deeper than the heel? That's someone moving fast, maybe struggling with a burden. A chill ran down my spine. "Show me where the trail goes." Jake led me away from the lake, following subtle signs. A broken twig here, a disturbed rock there. The trail led uphill, away from the main hiking path and deeper into the wilderness. "Jake, how far does this go?" Hard to say, but if someone wanted to get lost in these mountains, this is how they'd do it. There's old mining roads back in there, abandoned cabins. Someone who knew the area could disappear for months. I radioed the search coordinator. "We're going to need more people, and I think we need to treat this as a potential abduction." The words hung in the air, like a death sentence. In my 10 years as a ranger, I'd never had to use those words before. By noon, the search had expanded to include FBI agents from the Kalispell field office. Agent Patricia Chen was a small woman with sharp eyes who'd worked missing person cases throughout the Northwest. "Ranger Collins, walk me through everything you know." I briefed her on the mysterious hiker, the camera, and the boot prints Jake had found. She listened intently, taking notes. "The profile fits," she said finally. "We've been tracking a possible serial offender who targets young women in wilderness areas. 3 cases in the past 2 years, Washington State, Oregon, and Northern California. All victims were hikers, all disappeared from remote trails." My blood ran cold. "What happened to them?" 2 were found deceased after extended searches. Evidence of prolonged captivity. 1 is still missing. "Are you saying Michelle might still be alive?" "It's possible. The suspect's MO involves taking victims to remote locations, keeping them alive for several days. If we can find his base of operations..." I felt a surge of desperate hope mixed with horror. "What do you need from me? You know this park better than anyone. If someone wanted to hide a captive in these mountains, where would they go?" I thought about the vast wilderness, the countless hidden valleys and abandoned structures. There are old mining claims scattered throughout the backcountry. Most are marked on maps, but there are probably others. And there are seasonal cabins that hunters and researchers use. Can you make a list of the most likely locations? I spent the next hour with Jake, mapping out every remote structure we could remember. The FBI was bringing in additional resources, helicopters, more search teams, and specialists in tracking violent offenders. As the sun began to set on our second day of searching, I made a decision that would haunt me for years to come. I decided to check one more location before dark, an old ranger station about 5 miles from the lake, abandoned since the 1970s. I should have waited for backup. I should have followed protocol. But the thought of Michelle spending another night in the hands of a killer drove me to take the risk. The abandoned station was reached by an old fire road that was barely passable. I parked my truck about a quarter-mile away and approached on foot, my service weapon drawn and ready. The building was a small log structure, weathered gray by decades of mountain weather. Most of the windows were boarded up, but I could see a faint light flickering inside. I crept closer, staying in the shadows of the surrounding trees. Through a gap in the boards, I could see into the main room. A battery-powered lantern sat on a makeshift table, and tied to a chair in the corner was Michelle. She was alive, but barely conscious. Her red jacket was torn, and even from my limited view, I could see she'd been hurt. Standing over her was a tall, thin man in dark clothing, the mysterious hiker from the student's description. I keyed my radio as quietly as possible. "This is Ranger 7. I've found Michelle Hartley. Suspect is on scene and armed. I need immediate backup at the old Johnson station." The response was filled with static, but I caught enough to know help was coming. The problem was I didn't know how long Michelle had. The man was preparing something on the table, rope, a knife, and other items I didn't want to identify. I had to act. I approached the building from the side, staying low and quiet. The front door was secured with a new padlock, but I remembered that the back door had always been problematic. I crept around the building, testing each board until I found one that was loose. The old wood creaked as I pried it aside, and I froze, listening. Inside, I could hear the man talking to Michelle in a low, threatening voice. I couldn't make out the words, but the tone was enough to make my skin crawl. I squeezed through the gap in the boards and found myself in what had once been a storage room. The door to the main room was partially open, giving me a clear view of the scene. Michelle was more alert now, her eyes wide with terror. The man had his back to me, focused on arranging his instruments. I could see a pistol tucked into his belt. "You're going to tell me about your friends," he was saying. "The pretty blonde one especially. Does she hike often?" My blood turned to ice. This wasn't just about Michelle. He was planning more abductions. I took a deep breath and stepped into the doorway, my weapon trained on the suspect. "Park Service, drop your weapon and step away from the victim." The man spun around, his hand moving toward his gun. He was exactly as the students had described, tall, thin, with pale skin and dark hair. But his eyes were what I'll never forget. They were completely empty, like looking into a void. "You're too late, Ranger," he said calmly. "She's already told me everything I need to know." I said, "Drop your weapon." Instead, he dove for the table where he'd placed his knife. I fired once, catching him in the shoulder. He spun and fell, but managed to grab the knife as he went down. "Michelle, can you hear me?" I called out, keeping my weapon trained on the suspect. She nodded weakly. "He's been asking about my friends. He has photos of other girls." The man was struggling to his feet, the knife still in his hand. "You think you saved her? You have no idea how many of us there are. How many places like this?" "Stay down," I ordered. He looked at me with those empty eyes and smiled. "She's not the first. Won't be the last." Then he lunged toward Michelle with the knife. I fired again, this time center mass. He collapsed and didn't move. I rushed to Michelle, cutting her bonds with my pocket knife. She was dehydrated and had several minor injuries, but she was alive. As I helped her to her feet, I noticed a cardboard box on the table filled with photographs and personal items. Driver's licenses, student ID cards, jewelry. At least a dozen different women, all young, all with the same terrified expression I'd seen in Michelle's eyes. The backup arrived 15 minutes later. FBI agents, paramedics, and the county coroner. Michelle was airlifted to Kalispell Regional Medical Center, where she made a full physical recovery. The psychological healing would take much longer. The investigation that followed revealed the true scope of the horror. The man I'd killed was David Brennan, a drifter who'd been living in the wilderness for over 3 years. The photographs and items in his possession were linked to missing women across 5 states, but the words that haunted me most were his final ones. "You have no idea how many of us there are." In the weeks following the incident, FBI investigators found 2 more remote camps in the national park, both equipped for holding captives. They also discovered a network of similar predators who used wilderness areas as hunting grounds. Michelle returned to college and eventually became a social worker, dedicating her life to helping trauma survivors. We stayed in touch for several years, but eventually she asked me to stop contacting her. She needed to move on, and my presence was a reminder of the worst experience of her life. I remained a park ranger for 3 more years, but I was never the same. Every missing person case filled me with dread. Every lone hiker I encountered was a potential threat. The wilderness I'd loved since childhood had become a place of shadows and hidden dangers. In 2010, I transferred to a desk job with the National Park Service in Washington, D.C. I told myself it was a promotion, a chance to influence policy on a national level. But the truth was, I couldn't handle the isolation of the backcountry anymore. The case officially closed with David Brennan's death, but for me, it never really ended. I still wake up sometimes, thinking about those empty eyes and that final, chilling smile. I think about the photos of all those women and wonder how many other predators are out there, using America's most beautiful places as their hunting grounds. And I think about Michelle, hoping she's found peace, knowing that the price of her survival was paid by others who weren't as lucky. The wilderness is still beautiful, still awe-inspiring, but now I know it can also be a perfect hiding place for monsters. And sometimes, late at night, I wonder if we ever really find them all. That's the story of how a routine missing person case changed my life forever. How it taught me that the greatest dangers in our national parks aren't bears or weather or getting lost. Sometimes, the greatest danger is other people. My name is Cooper Hartley, and I've been a park ranger at Great Smoky Mountains National Park for 17 years. This happened during the last week of October, when what seemed like a routine missing person case became something that still haunts me every time I hear the wind through dying leaves. October is always our busiest season for search and rescue. The fall colors draw millions of visitors, and some of them, too many of them, underestimate the wilderness. They head out in sneakers and t-shirts expecting a nature walk, not realizing that the Smokies can kill you just as easily in autumn as in winter. Maybe easier, because the cold creeps up on you when you're distracted by all that beauty. The call came in at 4:47 p.m. on October 28th. I remember the exact time because I'd been watching the clock, counting down the minutes until my shift ended. The dispatcher's voice crackled through the radio with that particular tone that meant my evening plans were about to change. Ranger 7, we have a missing person report. Adult male, age 34, Last seen on the Appalachian Trail near Klingman's Dome around noon today. I grabbed my notebook and pen. Copy that. Name and description? Michael Chen, 5'8", approximately 170 pounds, black hair, wearing a red jacket and blue jeans. Reporter is his girlfriend, Sarah Mills. She's waiting at the visitor center. I should have been off duty in 13 minutes. But in this job, you don't walk away from someone who might be spending their last night in the woods. 10:04, heading to the visitor center now. The October air bit at my face as I stepped outside. The sun was already low, painting the mountains in shades of gold and amber, but it would be full dark within 2 hours. Less time than we needed. Sarah Mills was pacing in the visitor center parking lot when I arrived, her breath visible in small puffs. She was maybe 30, with worried eyes and hands that wouldn't stay still. The kind of person who'd driven up from the city expecting a romantic weekend in the mountains. Ms. Mills, I'm Ranger Hartley. Tell me what happened. She wrapped her arms around herself, shivering despite her heavy coat. We came up for the day to see the leaves. Michael wanted to hike part of the Appalachian Trail. I stayed at the parking area because I had a phone interview for work. Her voice cracked. He said he'd be back by 2 p.m. That was almost 3 hours ago. I pulled out my notebook. Standard questions first. Had he been drinking, taking any medication, any medical conditions I should know about? No, nothing like that. He's in good shape, hikes all the time, but... She hesitated. He's been acting strange lately. Distant, distracted, like he's listening to something I can't hear. I made a note. Stress, relationship problems, maybe a deliberate disappearance. It wouldn't be the first time someone had used the wilderness to escape their problems, but I kept that thought to myself. What was he wearing exactly? Red North Face jacket, blue jeans, hiking boots. He had a small backpack with water and snacks. She pulled out her phone. I have a picture from this morning. The photo showed a man with kind eyes and a slightly forced smile, standing next to a trail marker. Something about his expression bothered me, but I couldn't put my finger on what. I'll need you to stay here in case he comes back, I told her. I'm going to start a search. The trail to Klingman's Dome is popular, well-maintained, and clearly marked. In daylight, with decent weather, it should have been impossible to get seriously lost. But the mountains don't care about should. I radioed for backup and started up the trail with my flashlight, even though sunset was still an hour away. The forest felt different in the pre-dusk hours, quieter, more watchful. The leaves crunched under my boots with each step, and somewhere in the distance I could hear the hollow sound of wind through the bare branches. About a mile up the trail, I found the first sign, a broken branch at head height, with a few threads of red fabric clinging to the bark. I photographed it and marked the GPS coordinates. Michael had definitely been this way. The trail forked ahead and I stopped to consider my options. The main path continued toward Klingman's Dome, but a smaller, less maintained trail branched off to the left, heading deeper into the backcountry. A few yards down the side trail, I spotted something that made my chest tighten. Footprints in the soft earth, leading away from the main trail. The tread pattern matched the hiking boots Sarah had described. I keyed my radio. Ranger 7 to base. I'm about a mile up the Klingman's Dome trail. Found evidence the subject deviated from the main path, following tracks into the backcountry. Static answered me. I tried again. Base, do you copy? Nothing but white noise. I checked my radio. The battery was full, the antenna extended. Sometimes the mountains interfered with communications, but not usually this close to the main trail. I made a mental note to check with maintenance about the radio towers. The side trail was narrow and overgrown, the kind of path that might have been carved by deer or used by the Cherokee long before the park existed. The footprints were clear in the muddy patches, heading steadily downhill into a hollow I didn't recognize despite my years in these mountains. As I followed the tracks, the forest began to feel wrong. The trees seemed to lean in closer, their branches forming a canopy so thick that the dying light barely penetrated. The air grew colder, and I could smell something underneath the normal sense of decay and earth, something sweet and cloying, like flowers left too long in a vase. I tried the radio again. Still nothing. The footprints led to a small clearing where the trees opened up just enough to reveal a circle of flat stones arranged in a rough pattern. It looked old, maybe some kind of Cherokee ceremonial site, though I'd never seen it mentioned in any park documentation. In the center of the circle, something red caught my eye. Michael's jacket was folded neatly on one of the stones, as if he'd taken it off to sit down for a rest. But the evening air was cold enough that I could see my breath. No one would voluntarily remove their jacket. I photographed the scene and examined the jacket. No tears, no blood, no signs of struggle, just a jacket that someone had removed and left behind. The footprints continued on the other side of the clearing, but they looked different now. Deeper, as if Michael had been carrying something heavy, or as if something heavy had been carrying him. The trail led down into a ravine I'd never seen before, though I'd been hiking these mountains for nearly 2 decades. The sides were steep and rocky, covered in dead leaves that rustled with every step. At the bottom, a small stream gurgled over stones, the sound echoing off the ravine walls. I found Michael sitting on a boulder beside the stream. He was exactly where the footprints led, sitting perfectly still with his back to me. His hair was matted with leaves and dirt, and his white t-shirt was stained with something dark. He didn't turn when I called his name. "Michael? Are you hurt?" Nothing. I approached slowly, my hand instinctively moving to the radio on my belt. Still no signal. The ravine felt like a dead zone cut off from the outside world. "Michael? I'm Ranger Hartley. Sarah sent me to find you." He turned his head then, and I saw his face, or what had been his face. His eyes were completely black, not just the pupils but the entire eye, like holes punched in his skull. His mouth was open in a perfect O, and when he tried to speak, no sound came out. Just a wet clicking noise from somewhere deep in his throat. I stumbled backward, my heart hammering against my ribs. In 17 years of park service, I'd seen heart attacks, hypothermia, bear attacks, and suicide. But I'd never seen anything like this. Michael stood up slowly, his movements jerky and unnatural, like a marionette controlled by someone just learning to work the strings. He took a step toward me, and I noticed that his feet didn't quite touch the ground. I ran. I crashed through the underbrush, branches tearing at my uniform, my lungs burning in the cold air. Behind me, I could hear something following. Not footsteps, but a sound like wind through dry leaves getting closer. I reached the clearing with the stone circle and paused to catch my breath. The jacket was gone. In its place, scratched into the dirt, was a message in letters 2 feet tall. He wanted to come home. The trees around the clearing began to sway without any wind, their branches creaking like old floorboards. The sweet, rotting smell grew stronger, and I realized it was coming from the stones themselves. They weren't arranged in a circle by accident. They were covering something. I heard Sarah's voice calling my name from somewhere in the forest, but Sarah was back at the visitor center and I was at least 2 miles away. The voice was coming from the wrong direction, and it had a hollow, echoing quality that made my skin crawl. "Cooper, where are you? I found Michael." I didn't answer. I turned and ran up the trail, away from the voice, away from the clearing, away from whatever was wearing Michael's face. The forest seemed to shift around me as I climbed. Trails that should have led back to the main path twisted into dead ends. Trees that I'd passed on the way down appeared again and again, as if I was walking in circles. My GPS showed my position as a blinking dot in the middle of blank space, miles from any marked trail. The sun was setting now, and the temperature was dropping fast. I'd been in the woods for over 2 hours, and I was no closer to finding my way out than when I'd started. Worse, the sounds were getting louder, not just Sarah's voice, though that continued to call my name from impossible directions, but other voices. Men, women, children, all calling for help, all coming from deeper in the forest. I stopped at a fallen log to rest and check my equipment. My flashlight was working, but the beam seemed dimmer than it should be. My radio was still dead. My phone showed no signal and a rapidly draining battery. And according to my GPS, I was now somewhere in the middle of Fontana Lake, 20 miles from where I'd started. That's when I heard the helicopters. The sound came from overhead, the distinctive whop 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 of rotor blades cutting through the air. Search and rescue, probably called in when I failed to check in. I pulled out my emergency whistle and blew 3 sharp blasts, the universal signal for distress. The helicopter sound stopped immediately, as if someone had flipped a switch. In the sudden silence, I heard footsteps approaching through the trees, slow, deliberate steps that came from everywhere at once. I turned my flashlight toward the sound and saw them. People, dozens of them, standing at the edge of the clearing. Men and women in clothes from different decades, their faces pale and expressionless. A woman in a 1950s dress, a man in a Vietnam-era Army uniform, a child in a Boy Scout uniform that looked like it was from the 1980s, and in the front, Michael Chen, his black eyes reflecting my flashlight beam like a cat's. They all began to speak at once, their voices overlapping in a chorus of whispers. He wanted to come home. He wanted to come home. He wanted to come home. I understood then. This wasn't about Michael. This was about all of them. All the people who'd gone missing in these mountains over the years, the ones we'd never found, the ones whose families had eventually given up hope. They were all here in this place that existed between the spaces on the map, and they wanted me to join them. I closed my eyes and did the only thing I could think of. I remembered why I'd become a park ranger in the first place. Not for the steady pay or the federal benefits, but because I loved these mountains and wanted to protect the people who came here. I thought about Sarah, waiting at the visitor center, and about Michael's family, who deserved to know what had happened to him. When I opened my eyes, the figures were gone. The forest was quiet except for the normal sounds of wind and settling leaves. My radio crackled to life. Ranger 7, this is Base. What's your status? My hands were shaking as I keyed the microphone. Base, this is Ranger 7. I'm lost. I need assistance. Copy that. We have a helicopter in the air looking for you. Pop a flare if you have one. I fired my emergency flare into the air, and within 15 minutes I could see the helicopter's searchlight cutting through the trees. The rescue crew found me sitting on a log beside the main trail, less than a quarter mile from the parking area. I'd been missing for 6 hours, though my watch showed only 2 hours had passed. They never found Michael Chen. The official report listed him as a missing person, presumed dead due to exposure or accident. I filed my report and stuck to the facts. Tracks leading off the main trail, evidence of the subject removing his jacket, and a search that ended when I became disoriented in the dark. I didn't mention the stone circle, or the ravine that didn't exist on any map, or the thing that had been wearing Michael's face. I didn't mention the voices or the figures at the edge of the clearing. I didn't mention that, according to my GPS, I'd walked 17 miles in a perfect circle through terrain that should have been impossible to navigate. 3 weeks later, I requested a transfer to Mammoth Cave National Park. I told my supervisor I wanted a change of scenery, needed to challenge myself with a different type of environment. He approved the transfer without question. But I still dream about those black eyes and that hollow voice calling my name from the forest. Sometimes late at night I check the missing person reports from the Great Smoky Mountains, looking for patterns, for clues about what might be happening to the people who vanish in those mountains. There are always new names on the list, always people who walked into the forest and never walked out. And sometimes in the accompanying photos, I see that same distant look that Michael had in the picture Sarah showed me. The look of someone listening to something the rest of us can't hear. The look of someone who wants to come home. I never did find out what happened to Sarah. By the time I got back to the visitor center, she was gone. The staff said she'd left around midnight, said she couldn't wait anymore. She never filed a missing person report. She never contacted the Park Service again. Sometimes I wonder if she was ever really there at all. But I still have the photo she showed me, the one of Michael standing next to the trail marker. I keep it in my desk drawer, and every few months I take it out and look at it. Each time I notice something new, something wrong. In the background, barely visible in the shadow of the trees, there are other figures, pale faces watching from the darkness. And if you look carefully, You can see that Michael's shadow on the ground doesn't match the position of his body. It's pointing in the wrong direction entirely, pointing towards something that isn't there, or pointing towards something that's always been there, waiting in the spaces between the trees, calling to anyone who might be listening, calling them home. My name is Marcus Hartwell, and I'm 34 years old. I've been a park ranger at Great Smoky Mountains National Park for 8 years. This happened during the fall of 2023, when the missing person case of Elena Vasquez turned into something that still haunts me. The mist began forming in the late afternoon of October 15th, rolling down the mountains like ghostly fingers stretching through the valleys. I was finishing my patrol when the call came over the radio. A 28-year-old woman had disappeared during a photography session at Cataract Falls. Elena Vasquez, a freelance photographer from Nashville, had arrived alone that morning with professional equipment, planning to capture the autumn colors at their peak. Her car was still in the trailhead parking lot when I arrived, a blue Honda Civic with Tennessee plates unlocked with a backpack in the rear seat containing extra lenses and batteries. Nothing indicated struggle or haste, just an absence that already had me uneasy. "Base to Ranger 7, crackled my radio. It was Sarah Chen, our dispatcher. "We have more information on the missing person. Elena Vasquez checked into the hotel last night, told the desk clerk she planned to photograph the local legends before autumn ended." Local legends. That made me swallow hard. In the Smokies, we have more legends than we do trails, and most of them aren't the kind you want to encounter alone in the woods as darkness falls. I grabbed my emergency pack and headed up the Cataract Falls trail. The mist was thickening now, reducing visibility to maybe 30 feet. My flashlight beam seemed to get swallowed by the gray shroud that surrounded everything. The familiar sounds of the forest were muffled, creating an eerie silence broken only by my boots crunching through the thick layer of fallen leaves. The trail to Cataract Falls is a moderate 2-mile hike that winds through old-growth forest before opening up to the waterfall area. I'd walked it hundreds of times, but something felt different today. The mist seemed to move with purpose, swirling in patterns that didn't match the wind direction. And there was a smell, not the usual earthy autumn scent, but something else. Something that reminded me of old photographs in forgotten rooms. About a mile in, I found the first piece of evidence. A lens cap, expensive looking, lying just off the trail near a cluster of massive oak trees. I bagged it and continued, but the mist was getting thicker. My radio crackled with static. "Ranger 7 to base. I'm experiencing some communication issues. The mist is interfering with reception." "Copy that, Marcus. We're organizing a search team. ETA 20 minutes. 20 minutes felt like an eternity in that suffocating gray blanket. I pressed on, following the trail by memory more than sight. The sound of the waterfall should have been audible by now, but all I could hear was the mist itself, a low, almost breathing sound that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Then I saw the light. It was a strange, pale glow emanating from somewhere off the main trail, deeper in the forest. My training told me to stick to the established path, but my instincts as a search and rescue professional said that light could be Elena, using her camera flash to signal for help. I left the trail and pushed through the undergrowth toward the light. The mist grew thicker with each step, and I noticed something disturbing. My footprints behind me were already invisible, as if the mist was erasing my path. I marked trees with my knife as I went, cutting small arrows pointing back toward the trail. The light led me to a clearing I'd never seen before, despite 8 years of patrolling these mountains. In the center stood an old oak tree, easily 200 years old, its trunk scarred and twisted, and there, propped against the base of the tree, was a professional camera. Elena's camera. I approached carefully, my hand instinctively moving to my service weapon. The camera was still warm, its LCD screen glowing. The last photo showed a date stamp from just 20 minutes ago, long after Elena should have been found if she'd simply gotten lost. As I scrolled through the images, my blood turned cold. The early photos showed normal autumn scenes. Colorful leaves, the misty forest, artistic shots of tree bark and fallen logs. But as I scrolled forward, the images became increasingly disturbing. There were photos of the mist itself, but in the camera's eye, it wasn't just weather. The mist had shapes, human shapes. Dozens of them standing among the trees, their faces obscured but their postures suggesting they were watching, waiting. In one photo I could make out what looked like a child's face in the swirling gray, eyes wide with terror. The final photos showed Elena herself, but not as she had taken them. These were photos of her from outside perspectives, as if someone or something else had been using her camera. She was running, her face twisted in fear, looking back over her shoulder at something the camera hadn't captured. "Elena," I called out, my voice immediately swallowed by the mist. "Elena, if you can hear me, stay where you are. I'm here to help." The response came not from Elena, but from the mist itself. A voice, faint but distinctly female, called back, "Help, please, can't find the way." I spun around, trying to locate the source of the voice. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, echoing through the gray wall that surrounded me. My flashlight beam revealed nothing but swirling mist and the dark silhouettes of trees. "Elena, keep talking, I'm coming to you." "So cold, been walking for hours." But the voice was wrong. It had an echo to it, like someone speaking from the bottom of a well. And there was something else, a quality that made my skin crawl, as if the words were being formed by something that had forgotten how human speech was supposed to sound. I tried my radio again. Nothing but static. The mist had completely cut me off from the outside world. I was alone with whatever was out there, and every instinct I had developed over 8 years of mountain rescue was screaming at me to run. Instead, I followed the voice. The mist led me deeper into the forest, through areas that should have been impassable. Ancient trees seemed to part before me, creating paths that shouldn't exist. The voice continued to call, always just ahead, always just out of reach. "Please, hurry. It's getting darker." I stumbled through the undergrowth, my flashlight beam revealing glimpses of more abandoned equipment. A camera bag, a water bottle, a hiking boot, worn and muddy, but no Elena. Then I saw them. At first I thought they were just thicker patches of mist, but as I got closer I realized they were figures. Dozens of them, standing motionless among the trees. They were translucent, like photographs developed in gray instead of black and white. Men, women, children, all wearing clothing from different eras. A woman in a 1940s dress stood next to a man in hiking gear that looked like it was from the 1980s. A child in modern clothes held hands with someone in what appeared to be Civil War-era clothing. They all shared the same expression, a hollow, desperate longing that made my heart race. "Elena," I whispered, not sure if I wanted an answer. The figures turned toward me in unison, their movements creating subtle swirls in the mist. Their faces were becoming clearer now, and I could see that they weren't quite human anymore. Their features were blurred, as if someone had smudged a photograph while it was still wet. One of them, a woman with long dark hair, stepped forward. She wore modern hiking clothes and carried a camera around her neck. "Elena," I said, my voice barely audible. She nodded, her mouth opening to speak, but the voice that came out was that same hollow echo I'd been hearing. "Can't find the way out. What happened to you?" She gestured toward the other figures. "Came for the legends. Found the mist. It doesn't let go." I understood then. The local legends weren't just stories, they were warnings. The mist that occasionally rolled through these mountains wasn't just weather. It was something else, something that collected people like photographs in an album, preserving them in its gray embrace forever. "How long have you been here?" I asked. Elena looked confused, as if the concept of time no longer made sense. "Hours, days, years. It's all the same." I looked at the other figures, realizing that some of them might have been missing for decades. The Park Service had records of unexplained disappearances going back to the 1930s, people who had vanished without a trace, leaving behind only abandoned cars and worried families. "Is there a way out?" Elena's expression became more animated, more desperate. The camera, it shows the truth. Use it to see. She held out her camera and I took it with trembling hands. Through the viewfinder, the world looked different. The mist was still there, but now I could see it for what it really was. Not weather, but something alive. Something that fed on human essence and left behind only shadows. But I could also see something else. Thin lines of light, like trails of luminescent paint, weaving through the forest. They were paths, not physical paths, but something else. Ways through the mist that it couldn't or wouldn't follow. The light paths, I whispered. They're escape routes. Elena nodded eagerly. But can't follow them. Alone. Need someone from outside. I understood. The mist had claimed these people, but it hadn't claimed me. Not yet. I was still connected to the real world, still had a chance to find my way out. But I couldn't leave them here. What if I guide you? Use the camera to show you the way. For the first time, Elena's face showed something approaching hope. Yes, maybe, but dangerous. It will try to stop us. As if responding to her words, the mist around us began to thicken. The other figures started to fade, becoming more translucent. The temperature dropped noticeably, and I could see my breath forming clouds in the frigid air. We need to move now, I said, checking the camera's viewfinder again. The light paths were still there, but they seemed to be dimming. Stay close to me, all of you. I started walking toward the brightest path, holding the camera up like a compass. Elena followed immediately, and gradually, the other figures began to move as well. They walked with the jerky, uncertain movements of people who hadn't used their bodies in a long time. The mist fought us every step of the way. It grew thicker, colder, more oppressive. Tendrils of gray reached out like grasping fingers, trying to pull the rescued figures back into its embrace. I could hear voices in the mist, not the voices of the missing people, but something else, something angry and possessive. Don't listen to it, I called back to the group. Focus on my voice. We're going home. The light path led us through impossible terrain. We walked up vertical cliff faces as if they were gentle slopes, stepped across ravines that should have been hundreds of feet deep, and passed through trees that seemed to be made of solid stone. The mist's reality was different from our own, but the camera allowed me to navigate both. Behind us, the mist was becoming more aggressive. I could feel it pressing against my back, trying to drag me into its gray embrace. My flashlight began to flicker, and I realized it was trying to claim me too. If I stayed in here much longer, I would become another figure in its collection. Almost there, I called out, though I wasn't sure if it was true. The light path was leading us toward what looked like a wall of solid rock, but through the camera, I could see it was an illusion. There was a gap there, a way back to the real world. As we approached the gap, the mist made one final attempt to stop us. It surged forward like a living thing, engulfing the rescued figures. I heard Elena scream, a sound that was both human and something else, as if she was being torn between two worlds. I grabbed her hand, solid and warm and real, and pulled her toward the gap. Don't let go, I shouted. Whatever happens, don't let go. One by one, the figures followed us through the gap. The sensation was like being turned inside out, every nerve in my body firing at once. The world spun, colors inverted, and for a moment I thought I was going to be sick. Then we were through. I found myself standing on the familiar Cataract Falls trail, my radio crackling with the voices of the search team. The mist was gone, replaced by normal autumn fog. Behind me, Elena collapsed to her knees, solid and human and alive. Marcus! It was Tom Rodriguez, my partner, running up the trail with two other rangers. Thank God you're okay. We lost radio contact 2 hours ago. 2 hours. I looked at my watch. It was 9:30 p.m. I had been in the mist for less than an hour, but the search team had been looking for me for 2 hours. Time moved differently in there. I found her, I said, helping Elena to her feet. I found Elena. But as I turned to check on the other figures, my heart sank. The trail behind me was empty. Elena was there, real and breathing and terrified, but the others were gone. The mist had released her, but it had kept the rest. "Elena," I said quietly, "what do you remember?" She looked at me with wide, frightened eyes. The mist. It was alive, and there were people in it. So many people. She shivered. "Did you see them too?" I nodded. "Some of them have been missing for decades. Can we help them?" I looked back toward the forest where wisps of normal fog were beginning to form between the trees. "I don't know. But we have to try." The official report listed Elena's disappearance as a case of a hiker becoming disoriented in heavy fog. She had been found by Ranger Hartwell after an intensive search effort. No mention was made of the other figures, the impossible terrain, or the living mist that collected people like photographs. But I kept Elena's camera. In the days that followed, I studied every image, looking for clues about how to help the others. The photos showed a pattern. The mist appeared in the same area every autumn, usually during periods of high humidity and low barometric pressure. It was drawn to people who were alone, particularly those who were seeking something: adventure, artistic inspiration, or escape from their normal lives. I started researching the park's missing persons cases, going back decades. The pattern was there if you knew how to look for it. People who vanished without a trace, always during the autumn months, always in the same general area. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds. Elena recovered physically, but the experience changed her. She became obsessed with the missing people, spending hours researching their stories, trying to find connections. She started a blog about the park's unexplained disappearances, drawing attention from paranormal investigators and conspiracy theorists. Most people dismissed her stories as the trauma-induced fantasies of someone who had gotten lost in the woods. But I knew better. And I knew that sooner or later, the mist would return. It happened again the following October. Another photographer, this time a young man from Atlanta, disappeared near the same area. By the time I arrived at the scene, the mist was already forming. But this time, I was prepared. I had Elena's camera, and I had learned to read the signs. More importantly, I had Elena herself. She insisted on coming with me despite my protests. She said she could feel them calling to her, the people trapped in the mist. "They're not gone," she told me as we suited up with fog lights and emergency beacons. "They're just lost, and sometimes the lost need someone who understands their situation to guide them home." We entered the mist together, using the camera to navigate the light paths. This time, we found not just the missing photographer, but 3 other figures from previous disappearances. The mist fought us harder, as if it was learning from our previous incursion, but we managed to guide all 4 people back to the real world. 2 of them were recent disappearances who recovered fully. The third was a hiker who had vanished in 1987. He aged rapidly upon returning to normal reality, his body catching up with the decades he had spent in the mist. He died in the hospital 3 days later, but not before he was able to reunite with his family. The fourth figure, a woman who had disappeared in 1953, simply faded away when we crossed back into the real world. She smiled at us as she dissolved, whispering a single word: peace. We learned that the mist couldn't hold people indefinitely. The longer they were trapped, the more they became part of it, until eventually they became something else entirely. But if we could reach them within a certain time frame, they could still be saved. Over the next 3 years, Elena and I developed a system. We monitored weather patterns, watching for the conditions that summoned the mist. We studied the missing persons reports, looking for the telltale signs, and when the mist appeared, we went in after them. We saved 17 people. We lost count of how many we couldn't save, who had been taken too long ago to return to the living world. But each rescue felt like a victory against something that had been feeding on human suffering for generations. The Park Service officially discouraged our activities, but they couldn't deny the results. Missing persons cases in our sector dropped dramatically. The public began to take notice of the unusual number of successful rescues. and Elena's blog gained a following among people who had lost loved ones to the mountains. But success came with a price. Each trip into the mist left its mark on us. Elena developed a persistent cough that doctors couldn't explain. I started having nightmares about gray landscapes and hollow-eyed figures. And we both began to notice that normal fog looked different to us now. We could see shapes in it, faces that watched us from the corners of our vision. The mist was changing us, slowly but surely. We were becoming something between the living and the lost, caught between two worlds. Elena joked that we were becoming mistwalkers, but I could see the fear in her eyes when she said it. The end came on a cold October evening in 2026. The mist had appeared earlier than usual, thick and aggressive, and it had taken a family of 4, parents and 2 young children who had been camping in the backcountry. Elena and I suited up for what we both knew would be our most dangerous rescue yet. The mist was different this time. Angrier. It seemed to recognize us as we entered, and it struck immediately. Tendrils of gray wrapped around Elena's legs, trying to drag her down. I grabbed her hand, but I could feel the mist's strength pulling against me. "It's learning," Elena gasped. "It knows we're a threat." We fought our way deeper into the mist, using the camera to navigate toward the trapped family. We found them huddled together in a clearing, the children crying as their parents tried to comfort them. But as we approached, I realized it was a trap. The figures weren't the missing family. They were decoys, constructs made of mist and memory, designed to lure us deeper into the mist's domain. The real family was elsewhere, and we were now surrounded by dozens of the mist's servants, the people who had been taken too long ago to save, who had become part of the thing that had captured them. "Run," Elena whispered. But there was nowhere to go. The mist pressed in from all sides, and I could feel it seeping into my lungs, my bloodstream, my thoughts. That's when Elena made her choice. She grabbed the camera from my hands and smashed it against a tree. The lens shattered, the electronics sparked, and suddenly the mist recoiled as if in pain. The light paths that had guided us became visible to the naked eye, blazing like fire through the gray world. "Go!" Elena shouted, pushing me toward the brightest path. "Find the real family and get them out." "Not without you." "I'm already gone, Marcus, look at me." I looked, and my heart broke. Elena was becoming translucent, her edges blurring like the other figures we had encountered. The mist had been claiming her slowly, and now it was completing the process. "This is the only way," she said, her voice taking on that hollow echo I had learned to dread. The camera was keeping us anchored, but it was also keeping us trapped. "Without it, you can escape, but She didn't need to finish. I understood. The camera had been our lifeline, but it had also been our chain. By destroying it, she had freed me, but doomed herself. "The family," she said, pointing toward one of the blazing light paths. "They're that way. Save them, Marcus. Save them for both of us." I wanted to argue, to find another way, but the mist was closing in again. I could see the real family now, 4 figures huddled together in the distance. They were still solid, still human, still savable. I ran. The journey back to the real world was a nightmare. Without the camera, I had to navigate by instinct in the fading light paths. The mist fought me every step of the way, trying to drag me back, trying to claim me as it had claimed Elena. But I held on to my purpose, my duty to save the family, and somehow it was enough. I emerged from the mist, carrying the youngest child, leading the family back to safety. They were hypothermic and traumatized, but alive. The search team found us at the trailhead, and the family was rushed to the hospital where they made full recoveries. But Elena was gone. The official report listed her as a casualty of the rescue operation, killed in a fall during the search effort. Her body was never found. The Park Service commended her bravery and dedication, and a memorial plaque was installed at the Cataract Falls trailhead. Only I knew the truth. Only I knew that Elena Vasquez had become something else, something that existed in the space between the living and the lost. And sometimes, on foggy autumn nights, I could still hear her voice calling from the mist, warning other lost souls away from the gray places where the living don't belong. I retired from the Park Service 6 months later. The official reason was stress-related health issues, but the truth was that I couldn't bear to patrol those mountains anymore. Every wisp of fog, every shadow between the trees reminded me of what I had lost and what was still out there, waiting. But I still monitor the missing persons reports. I still watch the weather patterns. And when the conditions are right, when the mist begins to form in the valleys of the Great Smoky Mountains, I make sure the authorities are warned. I make sure the trails are closed, the campgrounds evacuated, because I know that Elena is still out there, somewhere in the gray spaces between worlds, still trying to guide the lost back home. And I know that the mist is still hungry, still collecting its photographs of human suffering. The legends are true. They've always been true. We just chose not to believe them. And sometimes in the quiet hours before dawn, I wonder if Elena made the right choice. If maybe, just maybe, it would have been better to stay lost together than to return to a world where the mist always wins in the end. But then I remember the family I saved, the children who went home to their beds that night, and I know that some choices are worth making, even when they cost us everything. The mist is still out there, it's still hungry, and somewhere in its gray embrace, Elena Vasquez is still fighting to bring the lost ones home. I just pray she never stops fighting, because if she does, if she finally gives in to the mist's call, then there will be no one left to warn the living about the places where the dead don't rest, and the mountains will have their legends, and their secrets, and their endless collection of photographs that no one will ever develop. The mist remembers everything, and it's always hungry for more. My name is David Morera, and I have 34 years. I'm a park ranger at Algonquin National Park in Ontario, Canada for 12 years. This happened during the autumn of 2019 when the case of the missing person Sarah Chen transformed into something that still haunts me. The first thing you need to understand about Algonquin in late October is that it's a different world entirely. The park covers over 7,600 square kilometers of dense boreal forest, and when the last of the autumn leaves fall and the first snow threatens, it becomes a place where sound travels strangely, and shadows seem to move independently of their sources. I'd been working search and rescue for 8 years by then, and I thought I'd seen everything the wilderness could throw at a person. I was wrong. October 27th, 2019. The call came in at 2:47 a.m. through the emergency line. A frantic voice, later identified as Dr. Michael Chen, a professor from the University of Toronto, reported that his daughter Sarah had failed to return from a solo photography expedition. She'd been documenting the changing autumn colors along the Mizzy Lake Trail, a moderately challenging 11-kilometer loop that most experienced hikers could complete in 4 hours. Sarah had left that morning at 7 a.m. with plans to return by 6 p.m. for dinner at their cabin on Canoe Lake. By the time I arrived at the command center, Sarah had been missing for 9 hours. The temperature had dropped to 2 degrees C, and a thick fog was rolling in from the south, reducing visibility to less than 50 meters. My partner, Ranger Jennifer Kowalski, was already coordinating with the Ontario Provincial Police and assembling our initial search team. Sarah Chen was 28 years old, a professional photographer specializing in nature and wildlife. She was experienced, well-equipped, and familiar with the park. She'd been visiting with her family since childhood. She carried a Canon EOS 5D Mark IV, multiple lenses, a GPS unit, emergency whistle, headlamp, and enough supplies for a day hike. Her father described her as cautious to a fault, never taking unnecessary risks. The initial search began at dawn. We had 12 volunteers from the local SAR team, 2 OPP officers, and 3 park staff. The weather was deteriorating rapidly. What had started as a mild October day was becoming a harsh autumn nightmare. The fog was so thick that searchers couldn't see more than arm's length in front of them, and the temperature continued to drop. I was assigned to lead Team Alpha along the Mizzy Lake Trail, retracing Sarah's planned route. The trail was well marked, and we found her footprints in the soft earth near the trailhead. The tracks were clear for the first 3 kilometers, leading us past several scenic overlooks where we found evidence of her photography work, disturbed leaves where she'd knelt to take shots, and a granola bar wrapper weighted down with a stone. At the 4.5-kilometer mark, near what locals call the Whispering Glen, everything changed. The tracks simply stopped. Not gradually, not as if they'd been washed away or obscured. They ended abruptly in the middle of the trail, as if Sarah had been lifted into the air. The last clear footprint was perfectly preserved in a patch of damp earth, pointing northeast toward the dense forest interior. "David, you need to see this," Jennifer called from about 20 meters off the trail. She was standing next to a massive white pine, her face pale in the gray morning light. When I reached her, she pointed to a series of deep scratches in the bark, starting about 7 feet up the trunk and running down to eye level. The marks were fresh, exposing the white wood beneath. "Bear?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Too high, too systematic, and look at the pattern." The scratches formed 3 parallel lines, each about 6 inches long, repeated in a descending spiral around the tree. No bear made marks like that. No animal I knew of did. We found Sarah's camera bag about 50 meters deeper into the forest, hanging from a branch 15 feet above the ground. The bag was intact, but when we retrieved it, the camera was missing. Her GPS unit was still inside, along with her spare batteries and lens cleaning kit, but the memory card slot was empty. That's when we heard the first howl. It came from the north, deep in the forest where the trees grow so thick that daylight barely penetrates. The sound was unlike anything I'd heard in 12 years of park service. It started low, almost like a human voice, then rose to an impossible pitch that seemed to resonate in my chest cavity. The other searchers froze, their faces reflecting the same primal fear I felt coursing through my veins. "What the hell was that?" whispered Tom Rodriguez, one of our veteran volunteers. Before anyone could answer, the howl came again, closer this time, and this time it was answered by another call from the west, then another from the south. We were surrounded. "Everyone back to the trail," I ordered, trying to keep my voice steady. "Now." As we retreated, I noticed something that made my blood run cold. The fog, which had been thick and uniform all morning, was swirling in unnatural patterns around us. It moved against the wind, forming spirals and corridors that seemed to guide us in specific directions, and in the gray-white mist I could swear I saw shapes moving parallel to our path. We regrouped at the command center by noon. The other search teams had found nothing except more strange markings on trees and an overwhelming sense of being watched. The OPP officers were professional but clearly unsettled. One of them, Constable Maria Santos, pulled me aside. "David, I've been doing this for 15 years, she said quietly. "I've worked missing persons cases in some of the most remote areas of northern Ontario, but I've never felt anything like this. It's like the forest itself is hostile." That afternoon, we expanded the search to include helicopter support. The pilot, Jake Morrison, had flown SAR missions throughout the region for 2 decades. He knew every peak, valley, and water body in Algonquin, but even from the air, the forest seemed impenetrable. The canopy was so dense that the thermal imaging equipment couldn't penetrate, and the pilot reported strange electromagnetic interference that made his instruments unreliable. "It's like there's something down there that doesn't want to be found," Jake told us over the radio. By evening, we had covered over 30 square kilometers without finding any trace of Sarah Chen. Her father arrived at the command center, his face gaunt with worry and exhaustion. Doctor, Chen was a rational man, a professor of anthropology who had spent his career studying folklore and indigenous cultures. But when I briefed him on what we'd found, something in his expression changed. "The scratches on the trees," he said. "Can you show me photos?" Jennifer pulled up the images on her tablet. Dr. Chen studied them for a long moment, then closed his eyes. "My God," he whispered. "I should have warned her." Warned her about what? Sarah wasn't just photographing the autumn colors, she was researching something for me, a paper I'm writing on Algonquin folklore. The local Ojibwe have stories about this area, about something they call the Wendigo's walking ground. According to the legends, this part of the forest was cursed long ago by a hunter who resorted to cannibalism during a harsh winter. The creature that emerged from that act of desperation has been stalking these woods ever since. I wanted to dismiss it as academic nonsense. But the scratches on the trees, the unnatural fog, the impossible howls, nothing about this case made sense through conventional logic. There's more, Dr. Chen continued. The stories say that the Wendigo can mimic human voices, that it uses the calls of loved ones to lure victims deeper into the forest. And it's said to be most active during the transition between seasons, when the barrier between worlds is thinnest. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Sarah's camera bag hanging from that branch, about the empty memory card slot. Something had taken those photos, but what? And why? At 3:17 a.m., my radio crackled to life. It was the overnight dispatcher, Sarah Mitchell, her voice tight with confusion. "David, I'm getting a signal from Sarah Chen's emergency beacon, but the location, it's impossible." "What do you mean?" "According to the GPS, she's directly below the park headquarters, about 60 meters straight down." I was at the station within minutes. Sarah's beacon was indeed transmitting, but the coordinates placed her deep underground, in an area where there were no known caves or geological formations. The signal was strong and clear, as if she was right beneath our feet. "Could be equipment malfunction," suggested Jennifer, but her voice lacked conviction. "Or something else," I replied grimly. We organized a small team to investigate at first light. Using ground-penetrating radar borrowed from the Provincial Geological Survey, we mapped the area around the headquarters. What we found defied explanation. A vast hollow space existed about 50 meters below the surface, a cavern that shouldn't exist according to any geological survey of the region. The entrance, when we finally found it, was hidden in a grove of ancient hemlocks about a kilometer from the headquarters. The opening was narrow, barely wide enough for a person to squeeze through, and it descended at a steep angle into absolute darkness. The walls were covered with the same spiral scratches we'd found on the trees, but these were older, worn smooth by time and weather. "This is insane," Jennifer muttered as we prepared to descend. "If Sarah's down there, how did she get there? And why would she go?" "Maybe she didn't have a choice," I replied, checking my headlamp one more time. The descent was treacherous. The passage twisted and turned, sometimes opening into small chambers before narrowing again to barely navigable gaps. After what felt like hours but was probably only 30 minutes, we emerged into a vast underground cavern. Our lights revealed a space that stretched beyond their reach, with a ceiling lost in shadows above. And there, in the center of the cavern, was Sarah Chen. She was sitting cross-legged on a flat stone, her camera in her hands, perfectly calm and apparently unharmed. But when she looked up at us, her eyes were completely black, reflecting our lights like the surface of a deep lake. "You shouldn't have come," she said, but her voice was wrong, too deep, with an echo that seemed to come from the cavern walls themselves. "Sarah, your father's worried sick. We need to get you out of here." She smiled, but it was not Sarah's smile. It was something predatory, hungry. "Sarah saw the most beautiful things down here," she said. "The memories of everyone who came before, the hunter who started it all, the settlers who lost their way, the loggers who disappeared in the 1800s. She wanted to photograph them all to preserve their stories." "Where are the photos, Sarah?" She held up the camera, and I could see that it was completely destroyed inside. The circuits were corroded, the lens shattered, but somehow she continued to hold it as if it were functional. "The memories are here now," she said, tapping her temple. "All of them. Every moment of fear, every last breath, every final thought. Sarah saw it all through the lens, and now she's part of the collection." Jennifer grabbed my arm. "David, we need to leave. Now." But as we turned to go, we found our path blocked. The narrow passage we'd used to enter was gone, replaced by solid rock. The cavern walls began to close in around us, and I realized with growing horror that we were trapped. "The Wendigo doesn't just hunt," Sarah's voice continued behind us. "It collects. Every person who enters its domain becomes part of the eternal story. Your memories, your experiences, your final moments, they all become part of something greater." The walls were definitely moving now, and I could hear Jennifer's breathing becoming rapid and shallow. In the distance, I could hear the howls again, but now they were coming from inside the cavern, echoing off the walls in a maddening chorus. "There's always a way out," I said, more to myself than to Jennifer. "There has to be." But as our lights began to dim and the walls continued their inexorable advance, I began to understand the true nature of our situation. We weren't just trapped in a cave. We were trapped in something's memory, something that had been collecting the final moments of lost souls for centuries. The last thing I remember clearly was Sarah's laughter, if it could be called that, ringing through the cavern like the sound of breaking glass. Then darkness and the sensation of falling through memories that weren't my own. I woke up 3 days later in the Huntsville District Hospital. According to the medical records, a hunter had found Jennifer and me unconscious in the forest, about 2 kilometers from where Sarah had originally gone missing. We were suffering from severe hypothermia and dehydration, but otherwise unharmed. Jennifer had no memory of the cavern, the underground chase, or Sarah's transformation. According to her, we'd searched the forest for 3 days without finding any sign of the missing woman, and had gotten lost ourselves in the fog and cold. The official report stated that we'd succumbed to exposure and experienced shared hallucinations as a result of hypothermia. But I remember everything. I remember the scratches on the trees, the impossible cavern, and Sarah's black eyes reflecting our lights. Most of all, I remember the feeling of being watched, of being part of something vast and hungry. Sarah Chen was never found. The official investigation concluded that she had become disoriented in the fog and fallen into one of the park's many deep lakes or ravines. Her body was never recovered, and the case was eventually closed as a presumed accidental death. Dr. Chen thanked us for our efforts and returned to Toronto. He never published his paper on Algonquin folklore. I returned to work after 2 weeks of medical leave, but I was never the same. The forest felt different now, alive with malevolent intelligence. Every shadow seemed to watch me. Every unusual sound made me reach for my radio. I started avoiding the deeper trails, sticking to the well-traveled paths near the visitor centers. 6 months later, I requested a transfer to a park in British Columbia. I told my supervisor that I needed a change of scenery, that the Ontario winters were getting to me. But the truth was that I couldn't bear to work in a place where I knew something was hunting. Jennifer stayed in Algonquin for another year before quietly retiring from the park service. She moved to a small town in southern Ontario and opened a garden center. We keep in touch occasionally, but we never talk about what happened that October. Sometimes, late at night, I still hear the howls. Not from outside, but from within my own memory, echoing through the corridors of my mind like a sound that will never fade. And sometimes, when I'm developing photographs from my new park assignments, I see faces in the shadows between the trees, faces of people who went into the forest and never came out. The official records will tell you that Sarah Chen died in an accident, a tragic case of an experienced hiker who underestimated the dangers of the autumn wilderness. But I know better. I know that somewhere in the depths of Algonquin National Park, in a cavern that shouldn't exist, something is still collecting memories, still waiting for the next visitor to stray too far from the marked trails. And I know that part of Sarah Chen is still down there, holding her broken camera, documenting the final moments of everyone who joins the eternal collection. The Wendigo doesn't just hunt, it preserves. Every scream, every last breath, every moment of terror becomes part of its vast archive of human suffering. If you ever find yourself in Algonquin National Park during the autumn months, when the fog rolls in and the temperature drops, remember this: stick to the marked trails, travel in groups, and never, ever follow the sound of someone calling your name from the deep forest. Because in Algonquin, the trees have eyes, the shadows have teeth, and some photographs are never meant to be taken. The Wendigo is patient. It has been collecting for centuries, and it will wait centuries more for the next perfect moment to add to its gallery of human memories. And somewhere in those dark corridors beneath the forest floor, Sarah Chen continues her work, documenting the final moments of each new addition to the collection. I carry her memory with me, along with the terrible knowledge of what's really waiting in the woods, And every night when I close my eyes, I can still hear the sound of that camera shutter clicking in the darkness, preserving moments that should never be remembered, in a place that should never be found. The autumn forest of Algonquin National Park remains as beautiful and dangerous as ever, and deep beneath its ancient roots, something continues to hunt, to collect, and to remember every soul that has ever been lost to the endless, hungry darkness of the Wendigo's domain.